I wanted to come out here to be a little bit closer. Now, those of you who are visiting or you might have missed last week, I'm doing a 3-part series on birds of the Bible. Can you imagine? Birds of the Bible. And so this particular text I have preached from before because I just thought it was so interesting. But I know that you might not have read this for a season or two, and so I wanted to introduce the book of Numbers to you. The book of Numbers, I just asked this question to a friend of mine this week who was a clergy. I said, where did they get that book of, that name, Numbers, from? What's that about? And I should have read my Bible because it says it right here. In the introduction to the book, it says, the English title, Numbers, derived from the Greek arithmoi, and Latin numeri translations. It's based primarily on the numbering or census of the people related in chapters 1 through 4 and chapters 26. So that's where it is. And it just lists numbers of different kinds of groups that are part of the Hebrew people. If one follows this lead, the book falls into 2 main divisions, etc., etc. And then it says this. The narratives portray a people who found that in the strange providence of God, the journey from promise to fulfillment led round about by way of the wilderness. In the Hebrew Bible, the book is appropriately called In the Wilderness. In the Wilderness. I thought that was great, referring to the long period, traditionally 40 years, spent in the wilderness. Much of the time, the people apparently stayed at an oasis, and where they arrived after the march from Sinai. The story is told in such a way as to reflect later struggles during the time of the monarchy, the Babylonian exile, and even later. So basically what it's saying there is that the priests wrote the book, Numbers. It does not idealize the wilderness period. Again and again, the people complain, sensing the contrast between the relative security of slavery in Egypt and the precarious insecurity of freedom in the wilderness. There were power struggles among the leaders, raising the question as who speaks to and for God. There were crises that threatened faith in God's presence in their midst and God's guidance into the future. So that's just a little introduction to the story of Numbers. And so I want to read you just pieces of chapter 11. You can take your Bibles that are in the pews and follow along if you want to. Numbers chapter 11. So it goes Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Gelnd. That's the way I remember it. The first 5 books of the Bible. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. All right. So here it is. Here's the start. Now, when the people complained, they were out in the desert of Sinai. When the people complained in the hearing of the Lord about their misfortunes, the Lord heard it, and God's anger was kindled. Then the fire of the Lord burned against them and consumed some outlying parts of the camp. Sounds like a wildfire, doesn't it? We know about that. But the people cried out to Moses, and Moses prayed to the Lord, and the fire abated. The fire went out. So that the place was called Taberah, or Taberah, because the fire of the Lord burned against them. And if you're reading along, you'll see that little footnote. You can see that little footnote. And the footnote, if you go down to the bottom of that column, you'll see that that is the word for burning. Burning. Something to remember. The rabble among them had a strong craving, and the Israelites also wept again and said, if only we had meat to eat. We remember the fish we used to eat in Egypt for nothing, the cucumbers, the melons, the leeks, the onions, the garlic. But now our strength is dried up, and there is nothing at all but this manna to look at. Now, the manna was like coriander seed. I don't know what coriander seed looks like. Does anyone know what coriander seed looks like? Like a mustard seed, but a little bigger, brown, small, round, brown seed. Okay. So now the manna was like coriander seed, and its color was like the color of gum resin. The people went around and gathered it, ground it in mills or beat it in mortars, and then boiled it in pots and made cakes of it. And the taste of it was like the taste of cakes baked with oil. I keep thinking of pancakes for some reason, but I think it was flat, little cake. When the dew fell on the camp in the night, the manna would fall with it. Probably the manna just appeared there on the plants. Moses heard the people weeping throughout their families, all at the entrances of their tents. Then the Lord became very angry, and Moses was displeased. And Moses said to the Lord, "Why have you treated me, your servant, so badly? Why have I not found favor in your sight that you lay the burden of all these people on me? Did I conceive all these people?" The answer, it's a rhetorical question, no. Did I give birth to them that you should say to me, "Carry them in your bosom, as a nurse carries a sucking child, to the land that you promised on oath to their ancestors"? Rhetorical question. The answer is no. Where am I to get meat to give to all these people? For they come weeping to me and say, "Give us meat to eat." I'm not able to carry all this people alone, for they're too heavy for me. If this is the way you're going to treat me, God, put me to death at once. If I've found any favor in your sight, do not let me see my misery. Moses has had it. He's at the end of his rope. Do you hear him? It goes on. Moses said, I'm down to verse 21. Moses said, "The people I am with number 600,000 on foot, and you say, I will give them meat that they may eat for a whole month. Are there enough flocks and herds to slaughter for them? Are there enough fish in the sea to catch for them?" The Lord said to Moses, "Is the Lord's power limited? Now you shall see whether my word will come true for you or not." Wow. Go on, down to verse 31. Moses and the elders of Israel had returned to the camp. Then a wind went out from the Lord, and it brought quails from the sea and let them fall beside the camp, about a day's journey on this side and a day's journey on the other side, all around the camp, about 2 cubits deep on the ground. A cubit is the length between my tallest finger, my middle finger, and my elbow. It's about 19 inches. There's a long cubit and a short cubit. They're about 3 different inches apart or different, but they're all around 16 to 19 to 20 inches. So 2 cubits deep would be approximately 40 inches, which is about this high, right? A yardstick plus 4 inches. I want you to get an idea of how many quail. How far can you walk in a day? Like a regular, Roger, how far can you walk in a day? 10 or 15 miles. That's probably what an adult, a normal adult would be able to walk. 10 or 15 miles. So 10 or 15 miles to our west or to our east would be how far into the mountain? Well, it wouldn't be quite to Park City, would it? It might be close to Park City, as the crow flies. 10 to 15 miles that way, where would we end up? West Valley, Oquirrh? So, okay, maybe the Oquirrh Mountains. 10 to 15 miles down there, that way. Would we make it to the point of the mountain down there? Not quite, but pretty far down. 10 to 15 miles north of us, where would that end up? Centerville, Bountiful, north of there. Okay, so picture that area. Do you have that picture in your mind? Now think about this, what it said. All around the camp, quail, 40 inches high, deep. Has everybody got that picture? That's a lot of quail. So the people worked all that day and night and all the next day gathering the quail, The least anyone gathered was 10 homers, it says. Now, I had to look that up. I didn't know what a homer was. Do you know what a homer is? A homer is supposed to be the amount that a burro can carry in one of the big bags along the side of the burro. It was approximately 90 pounds that you could put in a homer. So if the person who gathered the least, 600,000 men, gathered the least, 90 pounds times 10 is how much? 900 pounds of quail times 600,000 people is a lot of quail, right? It's a lot of quail. They spread out the quail all around the camp. They gathered the quail, spread it out. But while the meat was still between their teeth. Now, I don't know if you know Larry McGill. He is a member of the church. He's a veterinarian. In fact, he's a pathological? No, not. You would love that. What is he? A pathologist, veterinarian. So he studies animals that have died, right? And he said to me after the service, he said, if you've got that many quail on the ground, you can't imagine the kind of bugs and diseases are in there. And his eyes were kind of lighting up. Well, while the meat was still between their teeth, before it was consumed, the anger of the Lord was kindled against the people, and the Lord struck the people with a very great plague. How many of you have ever had food poisoning? I just want to see. Just raise your hand. What do you think about food poisoning? It's not good. It is not good, is it? While the meat was still between their teeth, before it was consumed, the anger of the Lord was kindled against the people, and the Lord struck the people with a very great plague. I think you know where I'm going. So that place was called, this is the key right here. That place was called Kibroth Hattaavah. Kibroth Hattaavah. And if you see that little footnote right there, and you go down, you'll see that meant that is graves of craving. Because they buried the people who had the craving. The word of God for the people of God. We are in the second of a 3-week series on birds of the Bible. It's based on a book by Reverend Debbie Blue, who's from Minneapolis. She wrote a book called Consider the Birds, a provocative guide to birds of the Bible. Last week we considered sparrows. Remember that? And then next week we're going to consider eagles or vultures. After the service, several of you told me stories about birds. John Adamson, who's a member of the church, he told me a story this week about when they had found a bird at his house and it had been hurt, and so he wanted to help it. He wanted to get it healed and fixed, and so he took it to 2 different veterinarians. They both told him the same thing: we'll euthanize the bird for $8. And John said to me, I can do it for free. And so he said he didn't want to do that, so he took it to a 3rd veterinarian who fixed up the bird, which had lost an eye, and subsequently took it to a refuge center where it could heal and then be let free. This week, Julia, right here, told me that they found a baby bird last week which had fallen from a nest or had been taken out by another bird or somehow. They found it in their driveway and they just couldn't leave it because they have 2 kids that they've got now, Alyssa and Albert, and they didn't want to say, we're not going to care for these birds, or this bird, and so they made a phone call. I don't know who you called. Wildlife Rehabilitation Center, and they found out that there's a volunteer who drives injured birds from Salt Lake City to Ogden to this rehab center daily. Did you know that? I had no idea. There must be a lot of injured birds in Salt Lake City is what I was thinking. And so that volunteer happened to be on vacation that day, and so they all got in their car, took the bird. What did you put the bird in? A shoebox. Have you ever done that? Oh, some of you are saying, yeah, we've done that before. And so they got in their car and drove through afternoon rush hour traffic to take this baby bird, baby dove, is what I understand it was. And they took it up to Ogden where it would get some help. They was going to get antibiotics and then hopefully would recover. And when able to fly, would be released, right? One person sent me a video of a blue heron. Do you know what a blue heron looks like? Some of you know what it's a big, big bird with a long beak. And they sent me this video of this blue heron which had eaten a gopher whole, and you could see it go down its neck. You can't unsee something like that. Don't send me anything like that again. Have you ever had a bird land on you? How many of you have had a bird land on you? I just want to see. Oh, a number of you. Helen, what kind of a bird landed on you? A pigeon. A pigeon lived in your basement. It hated your mother, but it liked you. Goodness sakes. It flew away. Wow. Andrew, you had a bird land on you? Well, what kind of a bird was it? Oh, did you have some food? And it landed on you. Did that freak you out? Yeah, you weren't planning on it that day. Well, I've never had that, but I know a person that had that happen, landed right on her head. And our Board of Trustees chairperson, Dale, some of you know him, told me that on a vacation he had a bird drop something on him. That's never good. He said he and his family referred to that vacation, which had a number of mishaps, as the Griswold vacation. Thought that was funny. This week we're going to look at the story about quail in the book of Exodus and Numbers. Would you pray with me? Oh God, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts help us, enliven us, refresh us as we make this journey of faith together. Amen. Now, some of you know about quail. I grew up in the Midwest. I grew up in South Dakota and Kansas. Those were the places that I grew up with. And they had quail there. They were called bobwhite sometimes. Any of you know bobwhite? Yeah. And they're pretty small. But Gina Ricci says that here in Salt Lake City, we have California quail. And so, which look like this. There's a picture there. You know what that thing is on the top of their head, what that's called? What is it called? It's called a plume or a top knot. I had no idea. And only the males have it because they think they're prettier. But that's a California quail. I saw one the other day as I was walking around my neighborhood. So I'm familiar with that other type of quail. And quail are considered a delicacy in many different places around the world. I had no idea that. But when we were young, my brother, whose name is James, and I, and my cousins, who were the same age, were about 10, 11, 12 years old, we would be the bird dogs for my uncles and my dad, who would be on the outside with their shotguns, and we would walk down these creek beds or wherever, through the bushes and the brambles and the stickers. I don't know why they never wanted to walk in the stickers. But we would walk through there, and we would kick up the birds for them, and they would shoot them. And so I know this about quail. They like to be in coveys of about 10 to 30 quail. And then when they would sit tight, and then when you'd get kind of on top of them, almost step on them, they would fly out. And they would sound like this. Like that, right? And it was like a horror story for a 10-year-old. I never liked going quail hunting very much. But we would get them, and then my grandmother would fry them up in an electric frying pan, and we would eat them. And I remember everybody liked those quails, but I didn't like those quails very much because every time you took a bite, you had to worry about a shotgun pellet. You ever had to worry about that? Oh, it was terrible. So they didn't seem like a delicacy to me, but my father and uncle seemed to like it. So there are two stories about quail. This is all an introduction. There are two stories about quail in the Bible. One is found in Exodus and one is found in the book of Numbers. They're parallel stories. They tell the same story. One story is a version of the other story. The story that's told in Exodus is supposed to have happened 1 year before the happening in the book of Numbers, but I think they're conflated. The plot is the same, but the content of the stories is significantly different. The story told in Exodus is that Moses had led the people out of Egypt into the desert to get away from Egypt. The people, after being in the desert approximately for a month and a half, became hungry. And they say, it would have been better if the Lord had killed us in the land of Egypt. There we had meat to eat. We had all the food we wanted, but you brought us into the desert. You will starve us to death here. So Moses tells God about it. God says, all right, go out and gather the manna. I'll provide meat also. It says, in the evening, quail came and covered the camp. Chapter 16, verse 13, if you want to go check in Exodus. It's all very nice. God provides. That's the moral of the story, or the tale of the story. There's no more mention of quail. God gave the people food. They ate it, though some of them tried to be greedy and not follow God's instructions at all. The story goes on about the manna that the Israelites ate for 40 years until they finally got to the land of milk and honey. The story of Numbers tells a similar story, but we get additional details. The story is written later by the priest. There may be some embellishment, though you'll have to be the judge of that. It is, I believe, a cautionary tale. Now, do you know what a cautionary tale is? A cautionary tale? A cautionary tale is a tale that's found in folklore mostly. And you will see that something is a danger. And the people, the actor in the story is told of the danger, but then goes through the narrative and does the danger anyway, and then something terrible happens. Now, there are different kinds of cautionary tales, of course, but one of the cautionary tales that I grew up with was this one. You might have heard it. Let me know if you've heard it. The cautionary tale was this. Young people should not go out on Lover's Lane or the drive-in or wherever and park. Do you know what I'm saying? Okay. They should not do that because this is what happened at one point in time. Billy and Jane, whatever, drove out on this lane, out to the end of this lane, and they sat there and they started parking. And there was an escaped convict from the nearby prison. And the escaped convict had a hook for a hand. Do you know where I'm going? And so at some point in time, they hear a noise and they get scared and they get in the car and they're driving away as fast as they can. And when they get back home, they open the car door and there was the hook. That's a cautionary tale, right? That's a cautionary tale. Who would tell that cautionary tale? Dad. A parent would tell that, and who else? Pastors. Pastors would tell that tale, right? Because they didn't want teenagers going out parking. That's a cautionary tale. The person who wrote Alice in Wonderland, you remember him? Lewis Carroll. In Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, wrote this. Alice had read several nice little histories about children who had got burnt and eaten up by wild beasts and other unpleasant things, all because they would not remember the simple rules their friends had taught them, such as that a red-hot poker will burn you if you hold it too long, and that if you cut your fingers very deeply with a knife, it usually bleeds. And she had never forgotten that If you drink much from a bottle marked poison, it is almost certain to disagree with you sooner or later. That's a cautionary tale. She knew cautionary tale. So the cautionary tale in Numbers goes like this. Once again, the people, this time 600,000 men. I don't know how many women and children. You can make a guess. They're out in the desert. There's a lot of people out there wandering around. How do you feed 600,000 plus men, plus women and children? They began to cry out, "We want meat to eat." They're just sick of it. Moses was sick of their complaining. "Why have you dealt with me this way, giving me all these people?" Etc., etc. It goes on, like I said. And then it says the place that they came to was called Kibroth Hattava, which means the graves of craving. The graves of craving. Now we're getting somewhere. Something that we all can use. Something that we all know about. Because I gave you a hint in the title of the sermon. The story about quails is not a story about quails. The story about quails is not a story about quails. It's not a story about protein and carbohydrates. The graves of craving. What are we to do with that? First of all, it may not be in our best interest to stand apart from the Hebrew people and point our fingers at them, but instead recognize that the human condition in them is the same as the human condition in us. That we have these desires, these cravings, how we get hungry for things. The Buddha said, it is our cravings that cause us suffering. And to get beyond suffering, we recognize our desires and then we let them pass. The Greeks believed it was all about keeping desire in check. And Augustine believed that the root of evil is desire. Desire is huge and it is complicated. And it seems like the wise ones from before knew what kind of trouble it can cause us. Sometimes you will desire something because you didn't get it as a child. Sometimes you will desire something because you got it as a child. You can think about that. We long for something or we lack for something and it drives us, it compels us to do one thing or another. We may desire more wealth or an easier life or a better way or an easier way. The psalmist says this, when the Israelites were tired of wandering through the desert, hungry and complaining, God gave them their own desire. God gave them their own desire, meaning that they wanted this meat so bad, this ease of life so much that what they desired overcame them. The story of the Hebrew people demanding food is the surface of the story, but underlying it is the idea that what they really needed was confidence that God was with them out in the wilderness. Now, I can remember sitting through sermon after sermon after sermon, hating this one sermon that was preached again and again and again, and it was, God is with you, God is with you. But that is the story. That is the story. Because they're wandering, they're in this desert, they're in this land, they're complaining, and God gives them this because they're complaining so much, but they get so much that it comes out that makes them sick. Makes them sick. Well, I think there's unmapped territory for all of us. Now, you're going to have a baby in February. January? You already have one child. But here's the unmapped territory for you. The second one is coming. You don't know how the first one will act with the second one. You don't know how the second one's going to act with the first one. You don't know how you're going to be the mother of two children now when you have been the mother of one. All of that is unmapped territory, isn't it? That's unmapped territory. It doesn't matter how old or young we are, we're all going to reach unmapped territory. Helen, whatever is happening in the future for you is unmapped territory. It doesn't matter how old we are. It doesn't matter if we're female, male, whether we've been successful or not successful. It doesn't matter whether we have money or don't have money. It doesn't matter if we're college educated or not college educated. It doesn't matter. We're all looking forward into unmapped territory. It's all unmapped territory. And this is the thing that gets me. What will your faith have something to say in that time as you go through that territory? Does it have anything to do with that as you traverse and move through and hike through and travel through that unmapped territory? It will or it won't. That's simply the way it is. The priest who wrote the story wanted everybody to conform. That's why cautionary tales are given. They want people to conform. The world is this big, but we want you to think about this craving piece. And I am a nonconformist by nature. But here I am looking at the Bible, and I've come across this story that says, be careful of your cravings. They can take you into places that might take you over the edge. Be careful. A cautionary tale. Will we listen? Amen.